Let us all unite and celebrate together the victories won for our liberation. Let us dedicate ourselves to rise together to defend our liberty and unity. All sons and daughters of Africa, flesh of the sun and flesh of the sky, let us make Africa a tree of life. Let us all unite and sing together to uphold the bonds that frame our destiny. Let us dedicate ourselves to fight together for lasting peace and justice on earth. All sons and daughters of Africa, flesh of the sun and flesh of the sky, let us make Africa the tree of life. Let us all unite and turn together to give the best we have to Africa, the cradle of mankind, the font of culture, our pride and hope at break of dawn. All sons and daughters of Africa, flesh of the sun and flesh of the sky, let us make Africa the tree of life.
Kusisikeleni Afrika, naluphakanyiswa uphondo lwayo, izwa imithandazo yethu. Nkosi, sikelela thina lusapho lwayo, bulela buluka sitshaba sa Yesu. Usibuluke, sitshaba sa Yesu, sitshaba sa South Africa, South Africa. Sounds the call to come together.
Good evening. A very, very warm welcome. Your Excellency, former President Thabo Mbeki, Honorable Sports Minister, Minister of Sports, Arts and Culture, Minister Nathi Mthethwa, the Vice Chancellor and the Principal of the University of KwaZulu-Natal, Professor Nana Poku, the Chairperson of the Luthuli Museum Council, Mr. Important Mkhize. Ladies and gentlemen, a very good evening to you and welcome to this year's 2021 Chief Albert Luthuli Memorial Lecture. My name is Peter Ndor. It really is an honor and a pleasure to be your program director tonight. Now, this year's lecture comes at a very special time. On this day, 60 years ago, Chief Albert Luthuli was finally able to receive the Nobel Peace Prize that he had been awarded in 1960. And this for his fearless non-violent fight and struggle against apartheid. It's also an auspicious day actually today, and it's all coming together because today is the World's Human Rights Day. And back in 1960, by recognizing Chief Albert Luthuli, the Nobel Committee placed human rights on the agenda and also joining the fight against the movement against apartheid. Now, the objective of this memorial lecture, for those of you perhaps this is the first time for you, is to promote the principles and the values of Chief Albert Luthuli, namely peace, human rights, justice, and coexistence of people in harmony, irrespective of their race, color, or creed. And what this lecture does is that it provides us with an opportunity to revisit and reflect on the legacy of Chief Albert Luthuli, a freedom fighter, a Nobel Peace Prize laureate, as you know, a remarkable man, a beacon of hope for so many people, and certainly a champion for justice and human rights. The theme for this year's memorial lecture is Africa and Freedom. And this is largely premised on his acceptance speech in Oslo, Norway in 1961, when he was receiving his Nobel Peace Prize. You'll hear a little bit more about that shortly, but it's really such a privilege for us to have a Pan-Africanist in the ilk of former President Thabo Mbeki to deliver this year's memorial lecture, especially since he delivered the inaugural one in 2004. So good to have you back, Mr. President. Now, the memorial lecture is something that has brought three parties together, three partners, and it's jointly hosted by the Luthuli Museum, the University of KwaZulu-Natal, and also the Department of Sports, Arts and Culture. And you're going to be hearing from all of these partners in a short while, starting with the University of KwaZulu-Natal, and with its vision of becoming the premier university of African scholarship. The university has been associated with Chief Albert Luthuli Memorial Lecture since the beginning in 2004. This to ensure that the values and the principles of Chief Albert Luthuli continue to be advanced on platforms such as this. And with that, it's my great pleasure now to welcome and to say a few words the Vice Chancellor and the Principal of the University of KwaZulu-Natal, Professor Nana Poku.
Thank you very much indeed, Program Director, and good evening to all of you colleagues. Former President of the Republic of South Africa, His Excellency, Mr. Thabo Mbeki, Honorable Minister of Sports, Arts and Culture, Mr. Nathi Mthethwa, Chairperson of the Chief Albert Luthuli Museum, Mr. Important Mkhize, members of the University KwaZulu-Natal Council, Senate, staff, and students. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is my privilege to extend a warm greeting to all of you on behalf of the University of KwaZulu-Natal, home to the legacy of Chief Albert Luthuli, a son of the province and one of the most revered moral leaders of the continent. As an institution, we are honored by your presence and to be associated with this important event. This year's theme, Freedom in Africa, could not have come at a more present time. As life in the province began to regain some semblance of normality, we begin to count the cost of the episode of July of this year, both human and fiscal. The event served as a stark reminder of how far we've traveled as a country and the challenge we still face in pursuit of inclusive democracy. Across the continent, the promise of post-colonial benefits are on trial. For most of our people, the experience to date is one of a struggle against insecurity, both economic and political. There is a palpable feeling of a job left undone, of a failed dream of modernity, of frustration at the incomplete consolidation of the state, and a self-serving governance architecture, of an unbecoming xenophobic world that is treating Africa with indifference. In the popular press, a common theme runs through all the predictions made of our continent. The vast land mass appears to be cited in order to stress its decrepitude, as if some curse of dubious scientific basis had been laid on political, economic, social analysis of the continent as a whole. The harsh reality is this: at present, Africa will not meet the Millennium Development Goals predecessor to the SDGs, which is due to complete in 2030. The reasons are, of course, not because of COVID-19 alone, although that has played a major part. The reality is that for decades, our continent's economic progress has been stalled. The promise of advantages of restructuring has not really been borne out. Foreign investments have failed to come in. The debt burden have continued. Inequalities have expanded. Along with it, of course, with the hopes and dreams of the next generation. But of course, time is not necessarily the issue here. It's about political awakening. And in the presence of the former president who has stood tall in his defense of inequality, in his pursuance of a safer, stable continent for development, we have here today an opportunity to listen to one of the real founding fathers of Pan-Africanism of the modern era, and that is President Thabo Mbeki. President, we welcome you warmly, and we look forward to your enlightening speech. Thank you very much. Back to you, Peter.
Professor Pulko, thank you very much indeed for those words of welcome. And you're so right that whilst freedom may have been attained across the continent, the post-colonial era certainly has not been without its challenges. And sadly, so much work still needs to be done if we're to create the Africa that we want and need for all our citizens. And we hope that this evening we'll certainly get some light from the former president in how we can move forward. Professor, thanks very much indeed for your words of welcome. Let's move on to our second partner, and it's the Luthuli Museum. That's really the custodian of Chief Luthuli's legacy, formed in order to conserve, uphold, promote, and propagate the life, values, and philosophies, as well as the legacy of the late Chief Albert Luthuli in the struggle against apartheid, oppression, respect for human rights, as well as a life devoted to non-violent resolutions to the world's problems. To share a few words and to represent the Luthuli Museum Council, it's my great pleasure to welcome the chairperson, Mr. Important Mkhize.
Mr. Peter Ndoro, former President of South Africa, Mr. Thabo Mbeki, the Minister of Sports, Arts and Culture, Mr. Nathi Mthethwa, and all protocols observed, ladies and gentlemen. The former President, Mr. Thabo Mbeki, will be delivering a keynote address under the name Africa and Freedom, as Professor alluded to earlier on. This year's lecture is taking place during the second phase of activism against gender-based violence. It is also taking place after 6 years in Chief Albert Luthuli was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize at Oslo in Norway in 1961. Ngakho-ke, siwuLuthuli Museum sithi phansi ngokuhlukunyezwa amalungelo esintu. Phansi ngokuhlukunyezwa kwabesimame nezingane. Sithi phansi. For 60 years after Inkosi Chief Albert Luthuli was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, sithi phambili South Africa. Phambili nokulwela inkululeko, freedom. Phambili nobulungiswa, justice. Phambili nokuthula, noxolo, peace and reconciliation. The significance of the 10th December 2021. Today, 10th December 2021, marks the 60th anniversary of Chief Albert Luthuli awarded with the 1960 Nobel Peace Prize. He was awarded this prestigious award for his role in the struggle against apartheid. He was the first African to be awarded such a prize. Indeed, this enhanced the picture of the African continent. It put the South African struggle on the roadmap of the world. It embarrassed the South African regime, which in the first place refused Inkosi Albert Luthuli permission to go to Norway to receive the award in 1960. International pressure intensified on the racist minority regime to allow him to go to Oslo. In 1961, the regime was forced to give him permit to travel to receive the award. This was a victory for the just cause of the South African liberation struggle and the freedom of the African continent and the struggle global for the global community. The apartheid regime was dealt a blow. The apartheid regime was dealt a blow because the prize is not just awarded to anyone, but to those who have done the most best outstanding work for fraternity between nations and for holding and promoting peace, justice, safeguard of human rights, and general humanity, or for the abolition or reduction of standing armies. In the eyes of the racist mentality of the regime, Inkosi Luthuli was not fit to receive the Nobel Peace Prize. The award exposed the apartheid regime's illegitimacy and hollowness. The resistance movement under the auspices of the ANC was elevated to high moral ground and just cause. The man himself, as we know and understand him as the people who are pursuing his legacy, Chief Inkosi Albert Luthuli. It is important to characterize Chief as a leader, a revolutionary, in that he had an outlook of total change to happen in South Africa. His vision was a united, non-racial, non-sexist South Africa. He was firm in calling for the end of the apartheid system and that it be replaced by a democratic system. A teacher and an educator. He was a teacher, educator. His teaching skills were professional and of high quality. His ability was complemented by the education and training he received in both Edendale and Adams colleges. These skills strengthened his ability to lead and officiate in meetings and general organizing on the ground, especially when he was interacting with the masses. During his tenure as the president of the ANC, the membership of the ANC grew in leaps and bounds, and the ANC became a formidable force to reckon with. He's coming from a humble upbringing. He was a man from a humble upbringing, a Christian, a home. His home was a home of worshippers, waking up and praying and sleeping with a prayer. This culture of practice made him a devout Christian. Instead of following the route of pie in the sky, he turned the Christian religion to a weapon that strengthened his power of doing things. He confronted the apartheid regime with the Bible and gospel with great mastery and art. This built his power, courage, and bravery. Religion became an integral part of his daily life. It enabled him to stand any storm coming his way. This made him a resilient and invincible person. A family man and advocate of gender equality. Inkosi Luthuli was a family man. Umnumza, uba, umuzi wakhe. He loved his wife uMapengu, his 7 children, sons and daughters. He respected and held women at high esteem. That was his nature. He contributed to the formation of the Women's League. He distanced himself from chauvinistic tendencies. A summary of his historical record. He never lost touch with the masses on the ground. He reached out to masses to educate them and sort out their problems. He became involved in their campaigns, in the people's campaigns on the ground. This was a skill he mastered while being the chief of Emakolweni in Groundville. As a chief, he performed his work with diligence and utmost excellence. He never demanded and collected bribes for solving people's problems and demand of fines and tax of various sorts, as it is the case today with some traditional leaders. He understood that people were poor and vulnerable as they faced a social system that did not provide social security to them. His leadership as the President General of the ANC coincided with the ascending to power of the Nationalist Party, the architects of the apartheid system. The repressive and oppressive laws passed by the nationalist government were met with equal and deepened resistance. The more apartheid was resisted, the more the regime resorted to harsher and stringent measures like arrest, burning, banishment, and later the shooting and killing of protesters. An act later triggered the burning of passes, which really was amongst the first who burned their passes. Luthuli himself was a victim of numerous burning orders and banishments. The burning orders confined him to the Stella district, magistrate district. At the expiry of each burning order, a new burning order will be imposed on him. 4 burning orders were imposed on him consistently during his lifetime. Together with other leaders, he was arrested and charged with treason. Between the time of his election in 1953 and his ultimate death on the 21st July 1967, despite burnings, arrests, and trials, and later an ailing health, Luthuli never lowered his guard. He endured the harassment of a repressive regime until his mysterious death. His death requires the reopening of an inquest as a measure to unearth the truth that was uncovered, that was covered by the apartheid regime. It was the practice of the regime to cover up on incidents of this nature. As we celebrate the 60th anniversary of UKZN Chief Luthuli Award of the Nobel Peace Prize, we remember his works that depict his stature, statesmanship, and integrity. He said, open quote, "I accept it as an honor, not only to South Africa, but to the whole continent of Africa, to all its people, whatever their race, color, or creed. It is an honor to the peace-loving people of the entire world, and an encouragement to us all to redouble our efforts in the struggle for peace and friendship." Close quote. I would like to conclude as Luthuli Museum would like to extend our appreciation to the former President T.M. Mbeki, the Minister of Sports, Arts and Culture, Mr. Nathi Tetwa, and the Vice Chancellor of KwaZulu-Natal University, Professor Pogu, for availing themselves on this auspicious occasion and their participation. The program for the people of South Africa to see and talk more of this prize bestowed to one of their kind, the Son of Africa, is yet to unfold. It is not just going to be a once-off event like the event today, but robust engagements are afoot on what it means for South Africa, the continent, and the world to have a leader such as Nkosi Albert Luthuli, and of course, other leaders of a similar caliber and stature. I thank you all.
Mr. Mkhize, thank you so much indeed for sharing those words on behalf of the Luthuli Museum Council and taking us through a remarkable life, well lived, bravely. And you're so right in mentioning that the receipt of the Nobel Peace Prize in 1960, but finally given to him in 1961, and in his own words, was a symbol for Africa, not just South Africa. And a significant moment, I think, for all of us across the continent to celebrate. And as you said, he was a man of humble beginnings, but a man who rose to achieve on so many platforms, his family, a man of God, a man of integrity who fought and soldiered on for the cause, for the human rights of all people, making sure that women don't get left behind as well. And despite all the obstacles, he fought right until the end. Thank you so much indeed for reminding us of how important this life that we're celebrating today was well lived. Thank you so much, Mr. Mkhize. All right, so for those of you who don't know much about Chief Albert Luthuli, one of the places that I really urge you to go and visit is the Luthuli Museum website. If you haven't been able to go to the museum itself physically, it is a wealth of knowledge. It is a treasure chest. And it's not just a story about Chief Albert Luthuli. It's about a story of South Africa. It's a story about the continent, and a story about the fight for human rights and the freedoms that we enjoy today. So please visit that website, and you'll find out that Groutville is a very special area with a long history with the Luthuli family. And it was there that Chief Albert Luthuli, seeing all the hardships that the people experienced, that influenced them to look at a broader context and realized actually that the struggle was across the nation. And this inspired him to do the work that he spent the rest of his life doing. He himself spent much of his early education in Groutville, and that's why this evening we're very happy to present some learners from Groutville High School to perform for us some poetry. So please, ladies and gentlemen, a warm welcome to our first two learners this evening, Siphelele Ngwane and Anovuyo Pamahashe.
Namanje ngisakhala ngisabathengi yaqalaza yakhala safi isizwe sabantu abansundu ukufa kokuqala kwakungukufa kwenyama nina selifa ukufa komphefumulo inzala bantu yesizwe ayizwe omama nabo banemizwa yeka laba abafele empini bengaphithi isikhathi basibamba zishisi izinsimbi zobandlululo uma amandle kuphelele endleleni mhlakababa izwa izwi likamkhulu Luthuli uma ethi khulula abantu bami behambe uma kungenjalo sizolokhu zikhalile isililo sizozwakala amacalomani umhlaba ukukhala kwabantwana be-chorus of roundings kuzonyakazisa izibeletho zabantu.
Okay, I'm not sure if we've lost the signal there, that it might have frozen. We're going to see if we can't try and get them back, but these are two young learners. I think they're back. Siphelele, if you want to carry on and finish your poem. Siphelele, can you hear me? Siphelele? Siphelele, carry on with your poem.
Uboqaphela abangani besizolipha umuntu obube ingaphakathi lapho ungayikhohlwa imvelaphi yakho kanye namasiko akho bese uyazigqaja kwamnyama ngoba kuyigugu lakho sukumu uyothatha okungokwakho eziqhageni ukulonde kube ngokwakho ngoba ilona igugu lakho ubuyuhaya.
Ngizamile sengikhale kwaze kwaqamba inhliziyo ngihlale ngikhala ngihlala phansi ngizibuza ukuthi kazi injabulo ingifanele na ngizamile ukuhlala phansi ngizama ukuyithola ngizamile ukuvula inhliziyo yami ngifuna ukuyifunda ngizamile kodwa ngigijile ngomzuzu owodwa kubhekile impilo isindlulile ngiphilile njengawo wonke umuntu ngoshile ngonile ukuthi umhlaba uyahlaba hlela ngempilo yakho phela wena ungumnikazi wedwa wempilo yakho mina ingeyakho kodwa noma uzokwenza phela usinge usuku nodusi ngabe ngizwini inkosi cela ungibonise indlela empumelelweni nami ngingumntwana empilweni ngizamile kodwa ngigijile kepha ngiyazi ukuthi esami isikhathi sofika esoqhakaza sofika amathuba azovela amahle azoqhamuka elami iciko ngizolifica yami destiny ngizoyifica yami inkondlo ngizolihaya.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Siphelele Ngwane and Anovuyo Pamahashe. Thank you so much for those poems. And I don't know about you, but every time I see young people performing, I am filled with optimism and an excitement actually about our future. They've just got such a special energy, don't they? We're going to hear from two other learners from Grantville a little bit later on. And again, something very, very important to Chief Albert Luthuli, education, being a teacher himself, and especially coming from that area. All right, let's hear now from the third partner of the group that make sure that this platform continues to happen, that these lectures continue to happen. There's a 15th one now, and there have been some remarkable voices over time, starting, of course, with the former President Thabo Mbeki, and we're so glad to have him back with us. But somebody who's certainly, whilst he's been Minister of Arts and Culture, and now sports as well, has been a custodian of one of the legacy projects, which is the Memorial Lecture, to make sure that icons such as Chief Albert Luthuli and others are not lost in history, that their work, their contribution and values, principles continue to be preserved. And so in the Department of Arts and Culture, they've made sure that this platform continues to stay open and that we can enjoy evenings such as this. To say a few words and to introduce our guest speaker for tonight, it's my great pleasure to welcome the Minister of Sports, Arts and Culture, the Honourable Minister Nathi Mthethwa.
Thank you very much, Peter Ndoro, our Program Director today, to the Chairperson of Luthuli Museum and the members of Council of Luthuli Museum, Mr. Important Mkhize, former President Thabo Mbeki, our keynote speaker today, Dr. Albertina Luthuli and the Luthuli family, Professor Nana Poku, Vice Chancellor and Principal at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, members of the Council of from UKZN, university communities represented both nationally and internationally, distinguished guests from African continent and across the globe, political, business, traditional and religious leaders, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, comrades and friends. Today we meet to honor the memory of one of the outstanding leaders of the South African Liberation Movement, the African National Congress, Chief Albert John Mvumbi Luthuli, an educator, a leader within his church, a democratically elected traditional leader, a President General of the African National Congress, and the first African to be awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in recognition of his outstanding contributions and efforts for the cause of human freedom, human dignity, non-racialism, non-sexism, democracy and peace in South Africa, Africa and the world. He remains one of the major figures of the African liberation politics who enjoyed enormous popularity and respect from his election as the President General of the African National Congress in 1952 to his tragic death on the 21st of July, 1967. This year marks the 60th anniversary of Chief Albert John Mvumbi Luthuli's historic receipt of the prestigious Nobel Peace Prize for 1960, which he received in Oslo, Norway, on the 10th of December, 1961. This Peace Prize is of greater significance for two main reasons. Firstly, it was the first Peace Prize that the Nobel Peace Committee awarded to a recipient outside of Europe and the Americas. Secondly, it was the first Peace Prize to be awarded to a leader of the liberation movement. It is these inspiring values of Chief Albert Luthuli which shone through a dark and oppressive period in South Africa. It gave many hope and courage to pursue struggles for just, free and equal South African society. It is in fact not surprising that he chose as his political home to join the African National Congress as early as 1945, a liberation movement dedicated to struggles for a just and equal society, which he served as president from 1952 up until his untimely passing in 1967, as we've just said. Chief Luthuli's dedication to fight a system that defined our people as a wretched of the earth should inspire us to remain resolute in the advancement towards a better South Africa. It must encourage all of us to guard, sustain, and protect our hard-won democratic freedoms. This one says, appreciative of the mountain South Africa must still climb to ensure greater harmony between what our Constitution promises and the lived realities of many. As can be seen today, this dichotomy that is expressed through glaring inequalities and poverty lines have become hunting ground for reactionaries and demagogues, elements which seek to undermine the democratic project, which Chief Albert Luthuli, through force of example, taught all of us to pursue relentlessly. When raising caution in this manner, we should equally not shy away from calling on Chief Albert Luthuli's own organization, the African National Congress, to do more of what it set itself to achieve for our country and in the world, and to do better and do it faster. Whilst in Oslo for the Nobel Peace Prize Award, Chief Luthuli's thoughts were quite revealing of his collectivism approach to our liberation struggles, as well as worldly outlook. In his message to South Africans, he states, and I quote, that I want you all to know that I'm accepting this Nobel Peace Prize, not for myself alone, but on behalf of all the people of South Africa who have played their part in striving for peace and cooperation between races. The letter concludes with the words that, quote, my prayer is that the day will soon come when all my people will share in the freedom and the good things of life, which are all around me as I write. In his Nobel Peace Prize acceptance speech, Chief Luthuli remarked that, and I quote, I can only pray, friends, that the Almighty will give me the strength to make my humble contribution to the peaceful solution of South Africa's and indeed the world's problems. For it is not just South Africa or Africa. There are other parts of the world where there are tensions, and those places are sorely in need of peace, as we are in my continent, as we are in our own area of South Africa. Chief Luthuli was a conscientious leader who believed that social and world problems can be resolved through nonviolent means, ethical leadership, and respect for human rights. As Africa's first Nobel Peace Laureate, he brought hope to the marginalized and expressed humility in being counted among those whose efforts have amounted to a noticeable contribution to the welfare of humankind. Chairperson, let me now turn to the introduction of our keynote speaker today, former President, President Thabo Mbeki, needs no introduction. It will only be my pleasure, Chairperson, to present to you former President Mbeki to address you on this very important occasion. Thank you very much.
Okay, so clearly I'm not President Thabo Mbeki. We are struggling a little bit to connect him online. We're busy doing that as we speak. But can I just ask you, Minister, and also Mr. Important Mkhize, just to come back online, and perhaps we can chat for a few minutes just before President Mbeki comes online to deliver the memorial lecture. And Minister, maybe I can just ask you, this year's theme really is about the continent by and large, and many people see Chief Albert Luthuli as the man of the ANC, a man of liberating South Africa. Zimbabweans very proud that he was born in Bulawayo, but he was a Pan-Africanist, that at the Nobel Prize receipt, that he would say that this is on behalf of a continent already placed his mind as an African in the true sense of the word.
Absolutely, Peter. You would see in his posture, you will see in his speech, you will see in his beliefs that he really believed in Pan-Africanism. He believed in our continent. President Luthuli understood that African people are one. When he spoke in the fight against apartheid, he never forgot to take on board the whole of the continent, even as he was receiving his Nobel Peace Prize. So what that says is that the organization he led, the African National Congress itself, and himself understood that theirs is not only for South Africa, hence the name, of course, African National Congress, not South African National Congress, as happened from the inception, as it were. So I think that if we want to understand better his contribution, we just have to look at the generation which took over after him, which learned from him, the likes of O.R. Tambo, the likes of Mandela, and so on. All of those leaders really took leaf from the leadership of Luthuli.
Mr. Mkhize, Chief Albert Luthuli was a man of peace, and that's what he wanted, not just for people here, but across the world. And I just wonder if he was alive today and was able to address the...
I didn't hear you, Chair.
Can you hear me?
There was an interruption.
Oh, okay. All right. I was just saying that Chief Albert Luthuli was certainly a man of peace, and that was his driving motivation for him. I just wonder if he was alive today, how would he perhaps address a body such as the African Union when we find ourselves in a continent that sadly still has so many challenges, and as much as we've tried, we're struggling to silence those guns?
Knowing and understanding the caliber of a man Chief Albert Luthuli was, he was a thinker, a deep thinker, a person that would look at the problem, look at the challenges, and keep on interrogating the problem, try and find solutions. He was a kind of a man that would not lose hope easily. So therefore, the problems that are confronting Africa today, I think he was going to, or he would, work on them step by step, moving forward, consolidating what he has done, and move on. Because problems and challenges of the magnitude that as the African continent that we are facing are not easy. You cannot deal with them overnight. And I think a man like Luthuli, with patience, intellect, and thinking, of course, not working alone, but working as a collective and bringing together people who might be or who have the ability to deal with the problem. I think with this kind of the methodical way he used to do things, I think he would have used that kind of approach of being patient, but moving forward to solve the problem. You look at how he built the African National Congress during his era as the president from 1952 up until his untimely death. The African National Congress became a powerful force. It grew, as I said in my speech earlier on, that it grew leaps and bounds. It became a force to be reckoned with, and it was not an easy work for the enemy, the apartheid regime, with all the armaments and all the power, the tanks of power. But a person like Luthuli mobilize the people in such a way that structures on the ground and the organization was built, it became formidable, it became strong. It is the effort of men, people like him, who have, Minister Nati has just correctly pointed out that he left a very powerful legacy in the sense that the generation that followed behind him learned a lot from him. Your name, Tata Mandela, O.R. Tambo, Walter Sisulu, and many others, you know, they modeled themselves to him and they were able to contribute in building the African National Congress. And I think his strategy of non-violent approach was a strategy that was relevant at that point in time, because people were not that strong to withstand the terms of power the regime, the apartheid regime was having at the time. The apartheid regime had machine guns, all sorts of weapons, tanks, all the firing power. It would have been unwise for a leader of his stature then to call on people to approach the struggle through non-violent means. To reach that stage requires a lot of preliminaries. You put them together and ultimately put them into action. I think he was a man of wisdom, and people of his nature, stature, and integrity can contribute immensely in shaping the African continent, what it should be, get rid of all these challenges that we are facing. African continent is a very rich, very powerful continent. It is a market on its own. Just that there is always the tentacles of colonialism that will always make sure that Africa does not reach where it wants to. But one day, Africa will triumph. That day will come. Thanks.
Mr. Mkhize, thanks very, very much indeed. I listen quite intently to what you're saying, and I wonder how a man would struggle because he's a man of peace. That in the end, guns had to be lifted to fight against the struggle, and I know that it must have been a really difficult thing for him to reconcile. But I suppose he had to see this, and I just wonder how challenging that was for him when he saw the armed struggle take off, and yet here was a man who was a man of peace, but could understand, I guess, how things were going on.
Yeah.
And eternal. The recognition that Africa shares a common destiny and that it is endowed with exemplary resilience, as stated by Luthuli and Pixley Seme, goes back to our earlier patriots in the 19th century, such as the great pathfinder, the Reverend Tio Soga, in an article published in 1865. even before the anti-African 1884-1885 Berlin Conference, which apportioned various parts of Africa to the various European colonizers, Reverend Soga said that Africa was of God given to the race of Ham. I find the Negro from the days of the old Assyrians downwards, keeping his individuality and distinctiveness amid the wreck of empires and the revolution of ages. I find him keeping his place among the nations and keeping his home and country. I find the Negro in the present struggle in America looking forward, though still chained, with chains on his hands and with chains on his feet, yet looking forward to the dawn of a better day for himself and all his sable brethren in Africa. I'd like to believe that all of us will not be surprised that other outstanding leaders of our people, such as Anton Lembede, the first president of the ANC Youth League, and Stephen Bantu Biko, leader of the Black Consciousness Movement, also followed in the footsteps of these leaders I've mentioned with regard to the important matter of the future of Africa. Anton Lembede said, my heart yearns for the glory of an Africa that is gone, but I shall labor for the birth of a new Africa, free and great among the nations of the world. And for his part, Steve Biko said that the great powers of the world may have done wonders in giving the world an industrial and military look, but the great gift still has to come from Africa, giving the world a more human face. And during his Nobel lecture, Luthuli pointed to the direct connection between the liberation of South Africa from white apartheid minority rule and Africa achieving the unique status which he described as reaching the summits of sublimity. And he said, whatever may be the future of our freedom efforts, our cause is the cause of liberation of people who are denied freedom. Only on this basis can the peace of Africa and the world be firmly founded. Our cause is the cause of equality between nations and peoples. And only thus can the brotherhood of men be firmly established. And in this context, Chief Luthuli reaffirmed an African commitment to struggle until victory is achieved, which he had made 5 years earlier in 1956, when he was responding to attacks against the ANC made by Jordan Ngubane of the Liberal Party. Then Chief Luthuli had said that the African National Congress knows where it is going. The African National Congress, on the basis of its program of action, will strive to attain the ideals enshrined in the Freedom Charter with a full sense of responsibility to the African people and their aspirations. And the African National Congress will carry on the program of African liberation and freedom for all to the best of its ability. I would like to point to two important conclusions from what I've just said. One is that Chief Luthuli drew attention to the fact that the liberation of South Africa was an integral part and would make an important contribution to the development of the Africa he and others like Pixley Seme and Steve Biko spoke about. And the other is that the Pan-Africanist perspective for the reconstruction and development of our continent and the aspiration that it plays its unique and rightful role in global affairs is, to use a popular colloquialism, part of the very DNA of the South African liberation movement. Bearing in mind the tasks, especially of the Chief Luthuli's organization, the African National Congress, two questions arise from these two conclusions. And those questions are, where are we with regard to task of the liberation movement towards South Africa, as spelled out by Luthuli? And secondly, where are we with regard to the achievement of the vision for Africa advanced by Chief Luthuli? I believe that it is self-evident that for the ANC to remain loyal to the commitment Chief Luthuli made, that it would carry on the program of African liberation and freedom for all to the best of its ability, it would have to retain its character as a true servant of the people. This matter is central to everything I'd like to say in this lecture. To address it, meaning the state of the ANC, I thought it best that the ANC should speak for itself. And I plead that even those among us who believe that they know what the ANC has said about itself should try to listen with a fresh ear, because they too will have to help answer the questions: what else should be done, should be said, and what else should be done about this critical and strategic matter, that is the state of the ANC. When Nelson Mandela presented his political report at the 1997 50th National Conference of the ANC, he said that a number of negative features within the ANC and the broad democratic movement have emerged during the last 3 years. We have an inescapable responsibility to attend to these matters frankly and decisively in defense of both our movement and our revolution. And one of these negative features is the emergence of careerism within our ranks. Many among our members see their membership of the ANC as a means to advance their personal ambitions, to attain positions of power and access to resources for their own individual gratification. In reality, during the last 3 years, he said, we have found it difficult to deal with such careerists in a decisive manner. And during this period, we've also been faced with various instances of corruption involving our own members, including those who occupy positions of authority by virtue of the victory of the democratic revolution. And he said, clearly we have to take all necessary measures to purge ourselves of such members and organize ourselves in a way that will make it difficult for corrupt elements to gain entry into our movement. At the ANC General Council in 2000, speaking as president, I said that the effect of the two features of the ANC as a mass movement for social change and a governing party has produced a result with which we must contend, and which Comrade Nelson Mandela dealt with when he presented his political report at our last national conference. The result I'm talking about is that we've attracted into and continue to retain opportunists and careerists within our ranks. These are the people who join the movement not because they respect or support any of the strategic objectives of our movement. They join with the great ease that our procedures as a mass movement permit, with the sole aim of furthering their personal careers and using the access to state power we have as a ruling party to enrich themselves. Another matter which Nelson Mandela addressed when he spoke in Mafikeng was the need for us, as part of our revolutionary duty, to work to change the social morality in our society. I'm certain that many among us followed the media as the former captain of our national cricket team, the Proteas, Ansi Cronje, gave evidence at the King Commission. One of the most outstanding things about the evidence that Ansi Cronje gave was how vividly it illustrated the point Nelson Mandela made about the dominance in our society of a value system based on the pursuit of personal wealth at all costs. We must therefore expect that some will indeed see membership of the ANC as a vehicle facilitating their access to personal wealth, an overriding value they would have learned from society, the society in which they grew up, in which they live. An important part of our struggle for Africa's renaissance is the struggle against corruption. And our experience in the last 6 years tells us that there is absolutely no reason why we should assume that we would ourselves stand no danger of becoming victim to the widespread corruption we have seen in other countries in Africa and elsewhere in the world. As an agent for change in our own country and frontline fighters against corruption in our society, we must guard against the latter two tendencies: the corruption of the ANC itself and the demobilization of the masses of our people. Later, I also said, because leadership in structures of the ANC affords opportunities to assume positions of authority in government, some individuals then compete for ANC leadership positions in order to get into government. Thus, resources, prestige, and authority of government positions become the driving force in competition for leadership positions in the ANC. There are people who, while holding ANC membership cards, do not belong to the ANC but belong to those who paid their subscriptions. This includes unqualified people who get appointed to such positions as municipal managers, placemen and women who serve as pliable tools of their political masters and who are used to advance the commercial and political interests of their handlers and patrons. Already at the 1997 conference of the ANC, the Secretary General had said, as in the past, the ANC's capacity to transform South Africa is dependent on the quality of its cadres. And agreeing with the SG, but speaking at the 2007 ANC conference, I said, I am certain that all those of us who have followed the evolution of the political situation in our country and movement over the last 5 years will have no hesitation in agreeing that the single and most strategic task we face is to strengthen the ANC both quantitatively and qualitatively to the point of understanding and accepting the proposition, better, fewer, but better. A full decade after this president's remarks at the 2007 Polokwane ANC conference, the Secretary General of the ANC said in his diagnostic report at the 2017 ANC policy conference, we owe it to ourselves first, the movement and the society, to analyze in detail the implications of a liberation movement that has ascended to power and therefore controls huge resources. Being in power is rapidly becoming a source of political bankruptcy, in that members of the ANC fight for deployment either as councillors, MPLs and MPs respectively, as if there is no tomorrow. It is foreign to our movement for comrades to see deployment as a source of material benefit rather than the reason to serve the people. At the policy conference a decade earlier, in 2007, I had said, I trust that all of us gave ourselves time to study and respond to the discussion document towards the centenary of the ANC, a strategic agenda for organizational renewal. The document concludes with the words, our movement has a track record of being a trusted leader and loyal servant of the people. Its strength lies in its ability to renew itself ideologically and organizationally, to take account of new developments and new challenges. And any organizational review and renewal proposal for the ANC have to pass one test. To what extent do those proposals, do they enhance the capacity of the movement to remain a trusted leader, a loyal servant of the people, and an agent for change? This is the main challenge. The 2017 54th National Congress of the ANC returned to this matter and said that chief among the challenges raised at the 5th Policy Conference and also highlighted in the strategy and tactics and the organizational discussion documents are one, a loss of confidence in the ANC because of social distance, corruption, nepotism, arrogance, elitism, factionalism, manipulating organizational processes, abusing state power, putting self-interest above the people, and even the strongest ANC supporters agree the sins of incumbency are deeply entrenched. Many organizations and thought leaders have become critics of the ANC and its leadership. The movement as a whole is judged as being part of the problem. And secondly, there are leadership weaknesses and loss of integrity, characterized by competition to control state resources, factionalism, conflict, ill discipline and disunity, and the use of state institutions to settle differences. Slates and vote buying has delivered leaders who have difficulty driving our programs or commanding respect from society and our supporters. And conference said it is these factors that cause the decline in credibility and support for the ANC, and said the losses of the 2016 local government elections were a direct result of these factors. Unless we arrest them in 2017, we will speed up the decline and will face a real threat of losing power in a number of provinces and most cities and towns. The conference took the critically important decision that organizational renewal is therefore an absolute and urgent priority, and said we may go as far as to say to the survival of our movement, of our great movement. In this context, we must recall that even later than this, in August last year, ANC President Ramaphosa wrote a letter to ANC members in which he said, as the inheritors of the legacy of Luthuli, of Tambo and Mandela, we must be honest with our people and ourselves. We must acknowledge that our movement, the African National Congress, has been and remains deeply implicated in South Africa's corruption problem. Today, the ANC and its leaders stand accused of corruption. And he said the ANC may not stand alone in the talk, but it does stand as accused number one. This is a stark reality that we must now confront, and those who see the ANC as a path to wealth, to power, to influence or status, excuse me, must know that they do not belong in our movement. They must change their ways or they must leave. Before I comment on the important matter of the organizational renewal of the ANC, I'd like to comment on the matter raised in the resolution of the 54th conference of the loss of electoral support by the ANC. With regard to the National Assembly elections, the ANC got 69.69% of the votes in 2004. And in 2019, 57.5. This means that the ANC lost 12.19% of national electoral support during the 4 national elections during the period 2004 to 2019 inclusive. Thus, on average, it lost 3% support on each election. And concerning the local government elections, the ANC took 66.3% of the vote in 2006 and 47.52% in 2021. This means that the ANC lost 18.8% of local electoral support during the 4 local government elections during the period 2006 to 2021 inclusive. This means that on average it lost 4.7% support on each election. The continuous degradation in the quality of the membership of the ANC emphasized at all ANC conferences for 2 decades, for the 2 decades between 1997 and 2017, contributed directly to the sustained loss of electoral support by the ANC. We must add to this the important matter of what has happened to the standard of living and quality of life of the people, especially the working masses, especially given that the ANC has campaigned on the promise of a better life for all in all of the elections since 1994. And for many years, with the ANC being the governing party, we have seen a stubbornly high and increasing level of unemployment, impacting mainly exactly on the working people who should benefit most from democratic rule. The 4th quarter unemployment rates for various years are as follows. In 2008, it was 21.5. And it was 34.9% in the 3rd quarter this year, 2021. We therefore see that this unemployment rate has grown by 13.4% in the 13 years between 2008 and 2021. This means that the millions of the unemployed have continued to grow in number, whatever and despite the efforts of the successive ANC governments. As we would expect, These ever-increasing unemployment rates reflect an economy in crisis. And I will cite a few economic growth statistics during the period between 2008 and 2020. The growth rate was 3.19% in 2008, down by 2.17% from the previous year. And 5 years later, it was 2.49% in 2013. And 5 years later still, it was 0.79%. In 2020, the growth rate was minus 6.96%, down from minus 7.71% from 2019. In reality, these figures speak of a stagnating economy incapable of creating the required jobs, bearing in mind the number of job seekers who enter the job market every year. Therefore, they speak of the growing impoverishment of millions of our people. We should also briefly mention the important matter of the distribution of wealth in our country. And again, here the story is also not good. A report published only 4 months ago by the World Inequality Lab says that attempts by the now democratic government of South Africa to wipe away the legacy of apartheid and colonialism have failed to narrow the imbalance between rich and poor. That imbalance is reflected in these figures in the 2021 Global Wealth Report of the financial group Credit Suisse, that South Africa's richest 1% currently hold about 41% of the country's total wealth, an increase from 35% recorded in 2019. And Credit Suisse says that 1% amounts to 376,000 people out of a total population of 60 million. And the report says globally, the broad category of wealth that represents the middle class is $10,000 to $100,000. And only 20.2% of South Africans currently fall into this category, down significantly from 32.2% in 2019. The same financial group, Credit Suisse, also says that 90% of the population controls only 20% of the country's wealth, and while the top 1% grows richer, the country grows poorer as the population increases while the economy stagnates. And given the continuing apartheid legacy, we all know what this report about wealth distribution means in the context of the entrenched racial and gender divisions in our country. We also remember that the report talks of a reality presided over by the ANC as a governing party. When the British Prime Minister Harold Macmillan addressed the parliament, the apartheid parliament in February 1960, he said, "We have seen the awakening of national consciousness in peoples who have for centuries lived in the independence upon some other power. And today, the same thing is happening in Africa. And the most striking of all the impressions I have formed since I left London a month ago is of the strength of this African national consciousness. The wind of change is blowing through this continent." When Nkosi Albert Luthuli delivered the Nobel lecture a year later and said, "But now the revolutionary stirrings of our continent are setting the past aside. This is Africa's age," and dreamed of an Africa which would reach the summits of sublimity, he was talking of the fruit of the wind of change which Prime Minister Macmillan had spoken of. Of course, he could not have known that for many years after the majority of our countries had gained independence, they would fall victim to much conflict and instability. I'm talking here of the great number of military coups and rule by military governments and conflicts within states, such as the wars in Sierra Leone and Liberia. I speak of wars such as the Biafra War in Nigeria, the war between Ethiopia and Somalia, and the war between Libya and Chad. I speak also of the one-party states, especially those like Mobutu's Zaire, which were merely a cover for dictatorship. We also saw evidence of the abuse of state power for self-enrichment, as well as the entrenchment of corruption. Mobutu and his Zaire were outstanding exemplars of this malpractice, but certainly not the only ones on our continent. And similarly, nothing was happening to improve the material lives of the masses of the African people. Indeed, the figures suggested that many of our countries were experiencing a growing impoverishment. Of course, until 1990, Africa continued to be confronted by a very stubborn apartheid tyranny, which refused to bend to the wind of change, which Prime Minister Macmillan spoke about in 1960, directly addressing the captains of racist domination in their own legislative chamber. Even after our own liberation, the situation in Africa looked so bleak to some in the world that on May 13, 2000, the influential British magazine, The Economist, published an editorial under the heading, Hopeless Africa, with the words, Africa, the hopeless continent, blazoned on its cover page. And the editorial said the new millennium has brought more disaster than hope to Africa. And worse, the few candles of hope are flickering weakly. And yet for some years already, Africa had embarked on its own turnaround strategy. This had begun with the process of democratization, which, swept through many African countries during the 1990s. This was to be followed by such important initiatives as the formation of the African Union to succeed the OAU, the adoption of such programs as NEPAD and the African Peer Review Mechanism. And then for many years, Africa achieved sustained high economic growth rates, with a number of African countries achieving some of the highest growth rates in the world. This time, on December 3, 2011, 11 years later, the magazine The Economist designated Africa the hopeful continent and published an editorial headed Africa Rising. And among others, it said, after decades of slow growth, Africa has a real chance to follow in the footsteps of Asia. Autocracy, corruption, and strife will not disappear overnight, but at a dark time for the world economy, Africa's progress is a reminder of the transformative promise of growth. But regardless of what the economists thought or said about Africa, our continent had taken its own steps to move towards the kind of Mother Africa which Chief Albert Luthuli had spoken about. The question was whether Mother Africa would be able to sustain the new path it had chosen, set to play the role globally which Chief Luthuli spoke about in his Nobel lecture. In this regard, many things have happened which are a cause of worry. In 2002, the developed countries organized in the G8 adopted their G8 Africa Action Plan, in which they undertook to align their economic relations with our continent on the basis of Africa's own program, NEPAD. This was a major step forward towards constructing equitable relations between our continent and the developed countries, with some of them being our former colonizers. However, by 2010, 8 years later, the G8 had walked away from the G8 Africa Action Plan. In the following year, in 2011, the UN Security Council effectively authorized NATO to commit an act of aggression to achieve regime change in Libya by removing the head of state, Colonel Gaddafi. This was directly contrary to a decision of the African Union Peace and Security Council, which had called for a negotiated resolution of the conflict in Libya, a process in which it was engaged. The NATO intervention not only resulted in the willful murder of Colonel Gaddafi, but also destroyed the Libyan state. This condemned both Libya and the Sahel region to sustained armed conflicts, which continue to this day. In 2017, the African heads of state and government took the decision to silence the guns by 2020. This was a brave decision finally to end the armed conflicts on our continent. Unfortunately, this has not been achieved. But of great concern in this regard is that a new war in Africa broke out in Ethiopia in November 2020, almost exactly as the continent was approaching the deadline for the campaign to silence the guns. Coming on top of the immense suffering and destruction this war had caused, particularly in the Tigray region of Ethiopia, one of the tragedies of this conflict is that 10 months after the war had started, the African Union Peace and Security Council had not addressed it. This is despite its express mandate to intervene to ensure peace and stability in all the member states of the AU, as well as the fact that Ethiopia hosts the headquarters of the African Union. I am citing these three instances of the abandonment of the G8 Africa plan, the willful destruction of the Libyan state, and the paralysis of the AU in the face of an active threat to international peace and security, to underline the point that Africa is moving further away from its noble role as visualized by Luthuli in his important Nobel lecture. As we celebrate the eminent leader, Chief Albert Luthuli, today, on the occasion of the 60th anniversary of the award to him of the Nobel Peace Prize, I believe that there are at least three major challenges to address, which would also practically confirm our claimed loyalty to his legacy. These tasks are: one, to do everything possible urgently to effect the renewal of the ANC. And number two, to act without delay to ensure that there is a sustained effort to achieve high economic growth rates and the sustained development of the economy. And thirdly, we must do everything to contribute everything we can to the renaissance of Africa. And naturally, the matter of the renewal of the ANC is fully the responsibility of this organization of Chief Luthuli, which must implement what is, after all, a directive issuing from its own 54th National Conference. And because it is a governing party, the ANC owes the whole country this renewal. Without this renewal, it will be impossible effectively to deal with the scourge of corruption. Without this renewal, it would not be possible to build a capable state which is vital not only for service delivery, but also to achieve the required economic growth rates, as well as significantly improve the safety and security of the population at large. The challenges of high levels of poverty, unemployment, and inequality stare us in the face, contrary to what Chief Luthuli expressly said was an intolerable result of the colonial and apartheid systems. Unfortunately, for the first time since 1994, all our country's four social partners are fully in agreement that they must work together to elaborate and implement an economic reconstruction, recovery, and growth plan, which must address three socio-economic challenges I have mentioned. These social partners, led by government, must act with the greatest urgency to implement their shared commitment. All their leaders must not forget that they are accountable to the nation as a whole and must keep the public regularly informed about what they are doing with regard to the commitment I have mentioned. And as I've said in his Nobel lecture, Freedom and Africa, KwaZulu-Natal linked directly our freedom to his vision of an Africa which in his words, would make a distinctive contribution to human progress and human relationships, with a peculiar new Africa flavor enriched by the diversity of cultures she enjoys. In an article in the Daily Maverick only 3 days ago, entitled "To Be a Force for Good in the World, We Must Strengthen Democracy in South Africa," the former Deputy Finance Minister, Mcebisi Jonas, drew attention to the matter of the relations between our country and the rest of Africa and the world. And among other things, he says that geography and history has decided that South Africa will be a player, whether we like it or not. There is no question that the route to our unique place in the world goes through Africa. And the best way to do that is to strengthen Africa's economies and institutions and to forge a new solidarity across the continent. And he said the goal should be simple: to promote economic growth and development, good governance, poverty alleviation, and human security. And he said the continent is stronger when it is united, and when South Africa plays a leadership role. Obviously, we do not have to agree with all the formulations in these comments by Mr. Jonas. However, they are important to the extent that they help to draw attention to the Pan-Africanist obligations that South African Liberation Movement has towards its own continent, consistent with its long-established being and identity. And as I've said, we must make our contribution to the unity and renaissance of Africa. And before I close, I must mention that this month, some among us will also celebrate the 60th anniversary of the establishment of the Liberation Army Mkondo weSizwe, MK. It is important that this very first founding unit is called the Luthuli Detachment. Chief Luthuli was very committed to the concept and practice of non-violent struggle, precisely because he was deeply committed to the need to protect human lives. He issued a statement on the 12th of June in 1964, after the Rivonia accused had been sentenced to life imprisonment, and said that the African National Congress, with allied organizations representing all racial sections, sought every possible means to redress intolerable conditions and held consistently to a policy of using militant, non-violent means of struggle. But finally, all avenues of resistance were closed. The African National Congress never abandoned this method of a militant, non-violent struggle and of creating in the process a spirit of militancy in the people. However, in the face of the uncompromising white refusal to abandon a policy which denies the African and other oppressed South Africans their rightful heritage, that is freedom, no one can blame brave men, just men, for seeking justice by the use of violent methods. Nor could they be blamed if they tried to create an organized force in order to ultimately establish peace and racial harmony. And he said they represent the highest in morality and ethics in the South African political struggle. They believe profoundly in justice and reason. When they are locked away, justice and reason will have departed from the South African scene. In these comments, KwaZulu-Natal spelled out the outlook and practice which were binding on MK. The founding detachment was named after him precisely as a commitment to the vision he espoused about those who had been forced, in his words, to seek justice by the use of violent methods. Those who convened to celebrate the 60th anniversary of MK should not omit to communicate this distinguishing feature of the Liberation Army conveyed by Chief Luthuli, including the fact that it was but one strand in a four-pronged offensive which included the non-violent mass struggle, which Chief Luthuli correctly said the ANC never abandoned. As we mark the 60th anniversary of the very first award of the Nobel Peace Prize to an African, KwaZulu-Natal, as well as salute him, proclaiming correctly that his spirit lives on, we must recall his words, that there comes a time when a leader must give a practical demonstration of his or her convictions and willingness to live up to the demands of the cause. Knowing that for anybody to betray the people's expectations means rightly to lose the confidence of the people and end the disrespect of right-thinking people in the country and in the world, and the disdain of posterity. We owe it to the present and to future generations that we honor our eminent leader and Nobel laureate, isithwalandwe siyaparangwe Chief Albert Luthuli and pledge to respect his legacy through practical deeds. And thank you very much indeed for your attention.
President Thabo Mbeki, thank you very, very much indeed for delivering this year's memorial lecture. Good to have you back on this platform after delivering the first one in 2004. A very different world that we live in now, a very different Africa. In just that short space of time, so much has happened, but we thank you so much for joining us this evening and describing a man who, as you said, was a visionary who saw much hope for the people of this continent, not just South Africa, but somebody who saw the liberation of South Africa as possibly a way to contribute to the development of the continent as a whole, and really an embodiment of the true spirit of Pan-Africanism. You asked the question about where we are now and whether some of these hopes have been realized. And you gave us an honest and a candid analysis of the party that you and Chief Albert Luthuli have loved and served all your lives, and the many challenges that have beset the movement. And as you said, a lot of work still needs to be done, given the challenges such as careerists and politicians involved in corruption that sadly have had consequences on the masses of people. The ones that really should have been enjoying the fruits of liberation ended up being at the bottom of the pile as a result of some of the challenges that the movement had been facing. And you said Chief Albert Luthuli saw the winds of change that were described by Prime Minister Macmillan, and he must have hoped for so much more for the continent at that time. But as you described, so much has not been fulfilled. And with that, you say that the governing party, your party, needs to find its renewal, but at the same time, all of us as Africans have to contribute in any way that we can, to find this new solidarity across the continent, and as you put it, a united Africa is much, much stronger. So thank you so much indeed for taking us through, which I'm sure must have been a difficult journey for yourself, describing the challenges that your party has gone through, but also the challenges of when you first talked about the African Renaissance. So much has not happened since, and I'm sure that it's been a challenge for you to watch. But as you say, we must all work together and find a way to fulfill Africa's promise, the promise that the early fathers of the post-colonial era had for our continent. President Mbeki, thank you very, very much indeed for delivering this year's Albert Luthuli Memorial Lecture. And we continue with our program. And once again, as I said, we would meet once again our learners from Groutville High School because of the special place that Groutville had in Chief Albert Luthuli's life and also education. And so to perform again some poetry, please welcome Amahle Mkwanazi and Nompumelelo. Okay, I think you have to press the unmute button there. Can somebody help Nompumelelo?
ngoMose ongasikhipha eGibhithe ezweni lehlupheko esifake ezweni lesethembiso isithembiso esizofezeka Kunini sithenjiswa kwelakithi bakithi, kepha lutho ukufezeka izethembiso. Sikhuluma kukhonompompi abangaphumi amanzi. Intukuthelo yomphakathi ishiya abafundi bencinde izithupha, izikole zabhebhethiswa ngomlilo ngaphandle. Uphila kanjani ngenkululeko usaboshwe yizo izinhlupheko? Ugogo ubelwela ukuthola okethunjini ukuze belale bedlile abazukulu. Omdala uthe ngawuqeda umatikuletsheni bakikizele omakhelwane ngakusasa kwalalwa seculwa amagugu. Bengingansuku zatshwala ngidla amafa abazali ngayeka isikole ngaphenduka untanda kubukwa ezweni. Namuhla ngikhala ezimathonsi umcebo ushabalele bengishoda ngazo izolileko. Impela otata bayilwela inkululeko kepha ngisaphila ngazi inhlupheko kwelikamthanyeli. Yabo. Kanti buyini ubulungiswa? Mina ngake ngabhalelwa ngesinye seziboshwa incwadi eyayithi DS bani samazwide bengisacela ukubuza kanti buyini ubulungiswa. Wathi ngibuza ngoba sengihlala iminyaka e15 ekhulu ukuthi ngicale ngakazi ngilenze. Uthi ngakhalelwa ngamasongo kaSigonyela ngicale ngakazi ngilenze. Uthi kwala ngisho sengichazele bengalo yomthetho ukuthi mina ngizange ngiphule umthetho kodwa ukukhuluma kwami kubo kwafana nokuthela amanzi emhlane wedada bangagqiza qakala kunalokho. Bakhetha ukwenza imali ngezindlela eziphansi izindlela zobumnyama. Okwakunguyena kanye isigilamkhuba bakhetha ukumdedela. Mina njengenkomo edla yodwa ngingumtshingi ubethwa ngubani ngingenabani. Bakhetha ukungininda ngobende inyama ngingayidlanga. Bangithosa amacala engingawazi bangigqokisa ijazi engingalazi. Kwala ngisho sengithi iqiniso ngizolikhuluma. Kepha ukukhuluma kwami kubo kwafana nokubhongela emswaneni. Bangisengela ezimithiyo bangibophela ezikabhoqo bathi bayobhubhisa wonke umndeni wami uma ngake ngakhuluma. Wathi DS bani samazwide kanti buyini ubulungiswa? Wathi ngibuza ngoba nalabo esibathembile sebakhetha ukusiguqukela esiswini kuhle kotshwala kunokuthi basivikele sebakhetha ukuthengisa ngathi ezimpisini ezigqoka izikhumba zemvu. Wathi yazi kulelizwe uma unemali sungasakhali ufakazi sengikhalela izingane zabafazi kazi iyo zala nkomona. Wathi DS bani samazwide bengisacela uphumele ngaphandle uyongibuzela ukuthi kanti kuyini ubulungiswa. Wathi mhlasimpe ngasingitholela impendulo. Wathi ngibhalele encwajana ngihlelo usiza ingancike ezinhlungwini. Wathi angisakhalele mina uqobo sengize ngavuma yami indaba iyophela lapha kepha sengikhalela laba bempofu abayophilela ukuthosa amacala abangawazi ngoba bengenamali. Wathi DS bani samazwide bengisacela ungibuzele kwelikamthanyeli ukuthi kanti buyini ubulungiswa. Ngithi ngisanake lokho sekuqhamuka omunye lokho ebalise ekhuluma yedwa ethi diye emnyango wezemfundo engabe imfundo kusayisona yini na isikhiye sempumelelo. Wathi ngibuza ngoba abaningi abaneziqo ezahlukene kodwa kunokuthi basebenze. Ngibabona bangojikanelanga baba imthithi yokumila ekhaya kunalokho baphenduka izidawo. Wathi diye emnyango wezemfundo engabe imfundo kusayisona yini na isikhiye sempumelelo. Wathi ngibuza phela ngoba kulo mhlaba silela ngokunye siphinde sivuke ngokunye. Wathi mhlasimpe yithi bese ngazi beshoda ngolwazi. Wathi diye emnyango wezemfundo engabe imfundo kusayisona yini na isikhiye sempumelelo. Wathi ngibuza ngoba abaningi abafundi baze bagogode emanyuvesi kodwa impumelelo kubo lutho kayibona kunalokho sibona benzi bobuba yaphumelela. Wathi diye emnyango wezemfundo ngike ngezona abaphambili bethi kulo mhlaba kusina kudedelwane. Wathi mhlasimpe yithi bese ngazi beshoda ngolwazi. Wathi diye emnyango wezemfundo engabe imfundo kusayisona yini na isikhiye sempumelelo.
Thank you very, very much indeed. That's Amahle Mkwanazi with a poem called Nkululeko. And just there you heard from Nompumelelo Mthembu with the Kanti Buyini Ubulungiswa. Thank you so much indeed for those wonderful, wonderful poems. Grantville High School, I'm sure, are enriched by your presence. And we certainly look forward to the next chapters of your lives as you lead our country. Those are our young people, our youth, and from Grantville High School performing for us. Okay, we're going to start coming to wrap tonight's memorial lecture activity. And for the final word, it's my great pleasure to welcome the grandson of Chief Albert Luthuli. Please welcome Sandile Luthuli.
Thank you, Peter. On this auspicious occasion today, I'm honored to be here. To our guest of honor, His Excellency, former President Mbeki, the Vice Chancellor of the University of KwaZulu-Natal, Professor Nana Poku, and the entire academic staff of the university, the chairperson of the Luthuli Museum, Kabazela, and the entire Luthuli Museum Council, the Minister of Sports, Arts and Culture, Minister Natim Tetwa Nyambose, Umndeni kaMadlanduna, led by Dr. Albertina Luthuli, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. To characterize Uzizi as the archetypal embodiment of South African and African history would be an understatement of immense proportions. Today's keynote address is testament to this incontrovertible fact. In the inaugural lecture delivered in March 2004, entitled "The Tempo Quickens," then President Mbeki set the tone for this lecture series, basing it on one of Chief Luthuli's previous writings, in tribute to the determination and fortitude of South Africans during the period of the defiance campaign of the 1950s. Sadly, the message of the 2004 lecture never found resonance, and the tempo never quickened, as recent electoral outcomes remind us. Eminent persons like former President Chisano, the late President Kaunda, former President Zuma, Samia Nkrumah, Deputy President Phumzile Mlambo Mngcuka, former Chief Justice Mogoeng, and many others rose to the standards set for them by President Mbeki. We can say with the greatest conviction that today's lecture has set the bar even higher. We have treasured every moment and insight you have shared with us on this Diamond Jubilee. Today, the country celebrates 25 years of the adoption of our Constitution. The foundation for the Constitution and our constitutional democracy was established in 1955 with the adoption of the Freedom Charter in Kliptown, an expression of the collective aspiration of the people of South Africa. We owe this day to Professor Z.K. Matthews, Chief Albert Luthuli, who was president of the ANC at the time, and many other brave men and women of the liberation struggle. To them, we give thanks. We extend a word of profound gratitude to the Department of Arts and Culture and the University of KwaZulu-Natal, who have remained unwavering partners of the Luthuli Museum on this important legacy preservation journey. We value the partnership and pay tribute to the leadership of both institutions. Putting together an event of this nature and magnitude requires effort from multiple parties. Allow me to recognize the staff of the University of KZN, the Luthuli Museum, and the Department of Sports, Arts and Culture, who have worked tirelessly to make this a reality. Finally, the success of a lecture series like this one is dependent on the attendees who sacrifice their time to share with us. We thank you. In this regard, the community of Groundville gains special mention for their continued embrace of the museum and the legacy of Inkosi Albert Mvumbi Luthuli and Unokukhanya Luthuli. Kuyabongeka sithi makwande ma-Afrika. To you, Peter, you are like a brother to us now. In closing, allow me to wish you all a very happy, safe, and COVID-free holiday season. Thank you. Over to you, Peter.
Thank you very much indeed, Sandile. And I think that that's a really good point to close tonight's memorial lecture. Thank you all so much indeed for joining us, for tuning in, logging on wherever you may be watching. And it really has been an enriching experience, I think, for all of us. We've learned so much. And once again, can I just urge you, please visit the Luthuli Museum website. There is so much there for you to be enriched by. Get a better understanding of Chief Albert Luthuli and why this lecture is so important. But also, let's not forget what we heard from President Mbeki, and he told us, please let us work together. Let us put our shoulders to the wheel in the spirit of new solidarity across the continent. Let's build Africa together. Good night, everybody. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. See you next year.